हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम टू माय चैनल NCERT अध्याय। आई होप कि आप सबकी पढ़ाई अच्छी चल रही होगी और आपने मेरे साथ बाकी के चैप्टर्स भी कवर किए होंगे। तो आज हम लोग स्टार्ट करने जा रहे हैं ऑर्गेनिजम्स एंड पॉपुलेशन। ठीक है, तो इससे पहले ये लास्ट चैप्टर है इस यूनिट का, इकोलॉजी का लास्ट चैप्टर है। बाकी के चैप्टर हम लोग ने कवर कर लिए हैं, तो आप उन्हें भी NCERT से आपको कहाँ पे इम्पोर्टेंट है, कहाँ पे चीज़ें ज़्यादा इम्पोर्टेंट है आती हैं, वो आप मेरी वीडियो से देख सकते हैं। तो चलिए स्टार्ट करते हैं। Our living world is fascinatingly diverse and amazingly complex. We can try to understand its complexity by investigating processes at various levels of biological organization, macromolecules, cell tissues, organs, individual organisms, population, communities and ecosystem and biomes. At any level of biological organization, we can ask two types of questions. For example, when we hear the bulbul singing early morning in the garden, we may ask, how does the bird sing, or why does the bird sing? The how type questions seek the mechanism behind the process, while the why type questions seek the significance of the process. For the first question, in our example, the answer might be in the terms of the operation of the voice box and the vibrating bone in the bird. Whereas for the second question, the answer may lie in the bird's need to communicate with its mate during breeding season. When you observe nature around you with a scientific frame of mind, you will certainly come up with many interesting questions of both types. Why are night blooming flowers generally white? How does the bee know which flower has nectar? Why does cactus have so many thorns? How does the chick recognize her own mother? And so on. You have already learned in previous classes that ecology is a subject which studies the interaction among organisms and between the organism and its physical environment. Ecology is basically concerned with four levels of biological organization: organism, population, community and biome. In this chapter we explore ecology at organism and population level. तो इसमें क्या क्या आता है? 4 लेवल होते हैं: organism, population, community, biome. Next, organism with it and its environment. Ecology at the organism level is essentially physiological ecology, which try to understand how different organisms are adapted to their environment in terms of not only survival but also reproduction. You may have learnt in earlier classes how the rotation of our planet around the sun and the tilt of its axis cause annual variations in the intensity and duration of temperature, resulting in distinct seasons. These variations, together with annual variation in precipitation, remember precipitation includes both rain and snow. तो precipitation में rain और snow दोनों आते हैं. Account for the formation of major biomes such as desert, rainforest and tundra. तो जो फिगर है 13.1 ये इम्पोर्टेंट है काफ़ी. इसमें जो डेजर्ट, ग्रासलैंड, ट्रॉपिकल फॉरेस्ट, टेम्परेट फॉरेस्ट, कॉनिफेरस फॉरेस्ट, आर्टिक एंड अल्पाइन टुंड्रा, इन सब पे क्वेश्चन आते हैं. तो ये टेबल जो है, ये फिगर है, ये अच्छे से याद रखना है. और एक्स एक्सिस पे क्या है? मीन एनुअल प्रेसिपिटेशन, और वाई एक्सिस पे क्या है? मीन एनुअल टेम्परेचर. तो ये भी हमें याद होना चाहिए. रीजनल एंड लोकल वेरिएशन विद इन ईच बायोम lead to the formation of a wide variety of habitats. Major biomes of India are shown in a figure 13.2. ठीक है, जो नेक्स्ट फिगर है हमारी, on planet Earth life exists not just in a few favorable habitat but even in extreme and harsh habitat. Scorching Rajasthan desert, perpetually rain-soaked Meghalaya forest, deep ocean trenches, torrential streams, permafrost polar regions, high mountain tops, boiling thermal springs and stinking compost pits, to name a few. Even our intestine is a unique habitat for hundreds of species of microbes. तो जो फिगर 13.2 है यहाँ पे नेक्स्ट पेज पे, यहाँ पे क्या दे रखा है? मेजर बायोम्स ऑफ इंडिया. इंडिया में जो मेजर बायोम्स है, पहला क्या है? ट्रॉपिकल रेन फॉरेस्ट. ठीक है, ए वाला क्या है? ये इस पे भी क्वेश्चन, इस फिगर पे भी काफ़ी क्वेश्चंस आते हैं. फर्स्ट में क्या है? ट्रॉपिकल रेन फॉरेस्ट. सेकेंड में क्या है? डेसिडुअस फॉरेस्ट. थर्ड में क्या है? ये डेजर्ट है. और डी ये क्या है? सी कोस्ट, एक सी के साइड की एरिया है. What are the key elements that lead to so much variation in the physical and chemical conditions of different habitats? The most important ones are temperature, water, light and soil. We must remember that the physicochemical component alone do not characterize the habitat of an organism completely. The habitat include biotic component also, pathogen, parasite, predator and competitor of the organism with which they interact constantly. We assume that over a period of time the organism had through natural selection evolved adaptation to optimize its survival and reproduction in its habitat. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट यहाँ पे क्या देखा, मेजर एबायोटिक फैक्टर। तो मेजर जो एबायोटिक फैक्टर्स हैं उनकी बात की गई है। टेम्परेचर, टेम्परेचर इज द मोस्ट इकोलॉजिकली रेलिवेंट एनवायरमेंटल फैक्टर। यू आर अवेयर दैट द एवरेज टेम्परेचर ऑन द लैंड वेरी सीजनली। तो सीजनली टेम्परेचर वेरी करता है। डिक्रीजेस प्रोग्रेसिवली फ्रॉम द इक्वेटर टूवर्ड्स द पोल्स एंड फ्रॉम प्लेन्स टू द माउंटेन टॉप्स। इट रेंजेस फ्रॉम sub-zero level in polar areas and high altitude to greater than 50 degrees Celsius in tropical deserts in summer. There are, however, unique habitats such as thermal springs and deep sea hydrothermal vents where average temperature exceeds 100 degrees Celsius. It is general knowledge that mango trees do not and cannot grow in temperate countries like Canada and Germany. ठीक है, तो जो मैंगो ट्री होते हैं वो कनाडा और जर्मनी में ग्रो नहीं करते हैं। स्नो लेपर्ड्स आर नॉट फाउंड इन केरला फॉरेस्ट एंड ट्यूना फिश आर रेयरली caught beyond tropical latitudes in the ocean. You can readily appreciate the significance of temperature to living organism when you realize that it affects the kinetics of enzymes and through it the basal metabolism, activity and other physiological functions of the organism. A few organisms can tolerate and thrive in a wide range of temperature. They are called eurothermal, but a vast majority of them are restricted to a narrow range of temperatures. Such organisms are called stenothermal. The level of thermal tolerance of different species determine to a large extent their geographical distribution. Can you think of a few eurothermal and stenothermal animals and plants? In recent years, there has been a growing concern about the gradually increasing average global temperature. If this trend continues, would you expect the distributional range of some species to be affected? नेक्स्ट इज वाटर। द मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंट क्या है, टेम्परेचर है, ठीक है। फिर नेक्स्ट आता है वाटर। नेक्स्ट टू टेम्परेचर, वाटर इज द मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंट फैक्टर इन्फ्लुएंसिंग द लाइफ ऑफ ऑर्गेनिज्म। बट नेक्स्ट टू वाटर इज द मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंट फैक्टर नेक्स्ट टू टेम्परेचर, टेम्परेचर के बाद। In fact, life on Earth originated in water and is unsustainable without water. Its availability is so limited in desert that only special adaptation make it possible to live there. The productivity and distribution of plant is also heavily dependent on water. You might think that organisms living in ocean, lake and river should not face any water related problems. But it's not true. For aquatic organisms, the quality, chemical composition, pH of water become important. The salt concentration measured as salinity in parts per thousand (ppt). ppt क्या होता है, parts per thousand is less than 5 in inland waters, 30 to 35 in the sea, and greater than 100 in some hypersaline lagoons. Some organisms are tolerant of a wide range of salinities. यूरोहेलाइन स्टेनो, इन सब पे क्वेश्चन आता है। यूरोहेलाइन, स्टेनोहेलाइन, ठीक है, ये इंपॉर्टेंट है। But others are restricted to a narrow range, that is stenohaline. Many freshwater animals cannot live for long in sea water and vice versa because of the osmotic problems they would face. तो ये जो लाइन है ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट लाइन है, मेनी फ्रेश वाटर एनिमल्स वाली जो है ये लाइन काफ़ी इंपॉर्टेंट है, इस पर स्टार लगा लो आप लोग। नेक्स्ट लाइट, तो टेम्परेचर हो गया, वाटर हो गया, अब हम लोग आते हैं लाइट पे। Since plant produce food through photosynthesis, a process which is only possible when sunlight is available as a source of energy, we can quickly understand the importance of light for living organisms, particularly autotrophs. Many species of small plants like herbs and shrubs growing in forests are adapted to photosynthesize optimally under very low light conditions because they are constantly overshadowed by tall canopied trees. Many plants are also dependent on sunlight to meet their photoperiodic requirement for flowering. For many animals too, light is important in that they use the diurnal and seasonal variation in light intensity and duration, that is photoperiod, as cues for timing their foraging, productive and migratory activities. The availability of light on land is closely linked with that of temperature since the sun is the source of both. But deep, deep, greater than 500 meter in the ocean, the environment is perpetually dark and its inhabitants are not aware of the existence of a celestial source of energy called sun. What then is their source of energy. The spectral quality of solar radiation is also important for life. The UV component of the spectrum is harmful to many organisms, while not all the color component of the visible spectrum are available for marine plants living at different depths of the ocean. Among the red, green, brown algae, the inhabit and that inhabit the sea, which is likely to be found in the deepest water. तो deepest water ये सबसे ये important question है. तो deep sea algae कौन सी होगी? रेड एल्गी. ठीक है, तो रेड एल्गी इसका आंसर हो जाता है. सॉइल, नेक्स्ट इज सॉइल. द नेचर एंड प्रॉपर्टीज ऑफ सॉइल इन डिफरेंट प्लेसेस वैरी. इट इज डिपेंडेंट ऑन द क्लाइमेट, the weathering process, whether soil is transported or sedimentary, and how soil development occurred. Various characteristics of the soil, such as soil composition, grain size, and aggregation, determine the percolation and water holding capacity of the soil. These characteristics, along with parameters such as pH, mineral composition, and topography, determine to a large extent the vegetation in any area. This in turn dictates the type of animal that can be supported. Similarly, in the aquatic environment, the sediment characteristics often determine the type of benthic animal that can thrive there. Next, responses to abiotic factor. Having realized that the abiotic condition of many habitats may vary drastically in time, we now ask how do the organisms living in such habitat cope or manage with stressful conditions. But before attempting to answer this question, we should perhaps ask first why a highly variable external environment should bother organism after all. One would expect one would expect that during the course of millions of years of their existence, many species would have evolved a relatively constant internal within the body environment that permits all biochemical reaction and physiological function to proceed with maximal efficiency and thus enhance this overall fitness of the species. This constancy, for example, could be in terms of optimal temperature and osmotic concentration of body fluids. Ideally, then, the organism should try to maintain the constancy of its internal environment, a process called homeostasis. ठीक है, इसे क्या कहते हैं? होम्योस्टैसिस. तो होम्योस्टैसिस की जो डेफिनेशन है ये भी काफ़ी इंपॉर्टेंट है. Despite varying external environmental conditions that tend to upset its homeostasis. Let us take an analogy to clarify this important concept. Suppose a person is able to perform his or best when the temperature is 25 degree and wishes to maintain it so even when it is even when it is strongly hot or freezingly cold outside. It could be achieved at home, in the car while traveling, and at workplace by using an air conditioner in summer and heater in winter. Then her performance would be always maximal regardless of the weather around him or her. Here, the person's homeostasis is accomplished not through physiological but artificial means. How do other living organisms cope with the situation? Let us look at various possibilities. जो फिगर 13.3 है ये काफ़ी इम्पोर्टेंट है. इससे क्वेश्चंस आते हैं. एक्स एक्सिस पे क्या है, वाई एक्सिस पे क्या है. एक्स एक्सिस पे क्या होता है? एक्सटर्नल लेवल. और वाई एक्सिस पे क्या होता है? इंटरनल लेवल. ठीक है, तो यहाँ पे एक्स एक्सिस पे क्या है एक्सटर्नल, वाई पे क्या है इंटरनल। अब इसमें जो बीच में स्ट्रेट लाइन होती है इसे रेगुलेटर कहते हैं, और जो पार्शियल रेगुलेटर, रेगुलेटर, कन्फॉर्मर, ये जो तीनों है, ये तीनों जो ग्राफ्स दिए हैं ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है और इस पे क्वेश्चन आते हैं, ये भी बहुत ज़्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है। रेगुलेट, सम ऑर्गेनिजम्स आर एबल to maintain homeostasis by physiological, sometimes behavioral also, means which ensures constant body temperature, constant osmotic concentration, etc. All birds and mammals and a very few lower vertebrate and invertebrate species are indeed capable of such regulation, thermoregulation and osmoregulation. Evolutionary biologists believe that the success of mammals is largely due to their ability to maintain a constant body temperature and thrive whether they live in Antarctica or in the Sahara Desert. The mechanism used by most mammals to regulate their body temperature are similar to the one that we humans use. We maintain a constant body temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. In summer, when outside temperature is more than our body temperature, we sweat profusely. The resulting evaporative cooling, similar to what happens with a desert cooler in operation, brings down the body temperature. In winter, when the temperature is much lower than 37 degrees Celsius, we start to shiver. Shiver, a kind of exercise which produces heat and raises the body temperature. Plants, on the other hand, do not have such mechanism to maintain internal temperatures. रेगुलेट हो गया, देन कन्फर्म, कन्फर्म में क्या आता है इन ओवरवेलमिंग मेजॉरिटी 99% of animals and nearly all plants cannot maintain a constant internal environment. ठीक है, their body temperature changes with the ambient temperature. In aquatic animals, the osmotic concentration of the body fluids change with that of the ambient water osmotic concentration. These animals and plants are simply conformers. Considering the benefits of a constant internal environment to the organism, we must ask why these conformers had not evolved to become regulator. Recall the human analogy we used above, such as like how many people can really afford an air conditioner. Many simply sweat it out and resign themselves to suboptimal performance in hot summer months. Thermoregulation is energetically expensive for many organisms. ठीक है, काफ़ी एक्सपेंसिव होता है, एनर्जी बहुत लगती है इसमें. This is particularly true for animals like shrews and hummingbirds. Heat loss or heat gain is the function of surface area. Since small animals have a large surface area relative to their volume, they tend to lose body heat very fast when it is cold outside. Then they have to expend much energy to generate body heat through metabolism. This is the main reason why very small animals are rarely found in polar region. Very important. ये जो पैरा है ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, हीट लॉस से लेके पोलर रीजन तक के इससे क्वेश्चंस बहुत आते हैं. During the course of evolution, the cost and benefit of maintaining a constant internal environment are taken into consideration. Some species have evolved the ability to regulate, but only over a limited range of environmental conditions, beyond which they simply conform. If the stressful external conditions are localized or remain only for a short duration, the organism has two other alternatives. Next is migrate. The organism can move away temporarily from the stressful habitat to a more hospitable area and return when stressful period is over. In human analogy, this strategy is like a person moving from Delhi to Shimla for the duration of summer. Many animals, particularly birds, during winter undertake long distance migrations to more hospitable areas. Every winter, the famous Koiladev National Park, Bharatpur in Rajasthan, hosts thousands of migratory birds coming from Siberia and other extremely cold northern regions. Suspend. In bacteria, fungi, and lower plant, various kinds of thick-walled spores are formed which help them to survive unfavorable conditions. These germinate on availability of a suitable environment. In higher plants, seeds and some other vegetative reproductive structure serve as means to tide over periods of stress besides helping in dispersal. They germinate to form new plant under favorable moisture and temperature conditions. They do so by reducing their metabolic activity and going into a state of dormancy. In animal, the organism, if unable to migrate, might avoid the stress by escaping in time. The familiar case of bears going into hibernation during winter is an example of escape in time. Some snails and fish go into estivation to avoid summer-related problems, heat and desiccation. Under unfavorable conditions, many zooplankton species in lakes and ponds are known to enter diapause. Diapause is a stage of suspended development. तो ये diapause वगैरह सब क्वेश्चन आते हैं. तो diapause क्या होता है? सस्पेंडेड डेवलपमेंट की स्टेज होती है. एस्टिवेशन, हाइबरनेशन, इन सब पे क्वेश्चन आता है. नेक्स्ट इज एडेप्टेशन. While considering the various alternatives available to organisms for coping with extremes in their environment, we have seen that some are able to respond through certain physiological adjustments while others do so behaviorally, migrating temporarily to a less stressful habitat. These responses are also actually their adaptation. So we can say that adaptation is any attribute of the organism, morphological, physiological, behavioral, that enable the organism to survive and reproduce in its habitat. Many adaptations have evolved over a long evolutionary time and are genetically fixed. In the absence of an external source of water, the kangaroo rat in North American desert is capable of meeting all its water requirement through its internal fat oxidation, in which water is a byproduct. It also has the ability to concentrate its urine so that minimal volume of water is used to remove excretory products. Many desert plants have a thick cuticle on their leaf surface and have their stomata arranged in deep pits to minimize water loss through transpiration. They also have a special photosynthetic pathway, CAM pathway, that enable their stomata to remain closed during daytime. Some desert plants like Opentia have no leaves. They are reduced to spines and the photosynthetic function is taken ओवर बाय द फ्लैटेंड लीव्स. तो ये ओपेंशिया का जो क्वेश्चन है ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. इस पर भी क्वेश्चन आता है. ठीक है, काफ़ी चीज़ों पे क्वेश्चन आता है. अडेप्टेशन पे क्वेश्चन आते ही आते हैं. Mammals from colder climate generally have shorter ear and limbs to minimize heat loss. This is called Allen's rule. Allen's rule भी बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. इस पर भी क्वेश्चन आता है. तो मैमल्स कहाँ से, जो कोल्डर क्लाइमेट से होते हैं, जो ठंडी जगहों से होते हैं, उनके कान छोटे होते हैं. शॉर्टर ईयर एंड लिम्स. ठीक है, ताकि हीट लॉस कम हो. इन द पोलर एरियाज एक्वेटिक मैमल्स लाइक सील्स हैव अ थिक layer of fat, that is blubber, below their skin that act as an insulator and reduces loss of body heat. Some organisms possess adaptation that are physiological, which allow them to respond quickly to a stressful condition. If you had ever been to any high altitude place that is greater than 3,500 meter, Rohtang Pass near Manali and Mansarovar in China occupied Tibet, you must have experienced what is called altitude sickness. तो altitude sickness जो है, sickness जो होती है, ये आप लोग ने फील की होगी जब भी आप किसी हिल स्टेशन वगैरह जाते हैं. its symptoms include nausea, fatigue and heart palpitation. Heart palpitation मतलब जी घबराना जिसे कहते हैं, नहीं है. This is because in the low atmospheric pressure of high altitudes, the body does not get enough oxygen, but gradually you get asthmatized and stop experiencing altitude sickness. How did your body solve this problem? The body compensates low oxygen availability by increasing RBC production, that is red blood cell production, decreasing the binding affinity of hemoglobin and by increasing breathing rate. ये है आंसर इसका. कैसे होता है? लो ऑक्सीजन अवेलेबिलिटी बाय इंक्रीजिंग आरबीसी. आरबीसी का प्रोडक्शन बढ़ा देता है और बाइंडिंग एफिनिटी जो होती है हीमोग्लोबिन की उसे कम कर देता है. Many tribes live in the high altitude of Himalayas. Find out if they normally have a higher RBC count or total hemoglobin than people living in the plains. In most animals, the metabolic reaction and hence all the physiological function proceed optimally in a narrow temperature range. In human, it is 37 degrees Celsius. But there are microbes, archaebacteria, that flourish in hot springs and deep sea hydrothermal vent where temperature far exceed 100 degrees Celsius. How is this possible? Many fish thrive in Antarctic water where the temperature is always below zero. How do they manage to keep their body fluids from freezing? A large variety of marine invertebrate and fish live at great depth in the ocean where the pressure could be greater than 100 times the normal atmospheric pressure that we experience. How do they live under such crushing pressure, and do they have any special enzyme? Organisms living in such extreme environment show a fascinating array of biochemical adaptation. Some organisms show behavioral responses to cope with variation in their environment. Desert lizards lack the physiological ability that mammals have to deal with the high temperature of their habitat, but manage to keep their body temperature fairly constant by behavioral means. They bask in the sun and absorb heat when their body temperature drops below the comfort zone. जब टेम्परेचर कंफर्ट जोन से कम हो जाता है, बट मूव इन टू शेड व्हेन द एम्बिएंट टेम्परेचर स्टार्ट्स इंक्रीजिंग, जब टेम्परेचर जैसे ही बढ़ने लगता है. Some species are capable of burrowing into the soil to hide and escape from the above ground heat. Next is population. Population attributes की बात करते हैं. In nature, we rarely find isolated single individuals of any species. Majority of them live in groups. Generally group में होते हैं in a well-defined geographical area, share or compete for similar resources, potentially interbreed and thus constitute a population. Although the term interbreeding implies sexual reproduction, a group of individuals resulting from even asexual reproduction is also generally considered a population for the purpose of ecological studies. All the cormorants in the wetland, rats in an abundant dwelling, teakwood trees in the forest tract, bacteria in a culture plate, and lotus plant in a pond are some examples of population. In early chapters, you have learned that although an individual organism is the one that has to cope with the changed environment, it is at the population level that natural selection operates to evolve the desired trait. Population ecology is therefore an important area of ecology because it links ecology to population, genetic, and evolution. A population has certain attributes that an individual organism does not. An individual may have birth and death, but a population has birth rate and death rate. तो अगर population में हम लोग birth rate, death rate देखते हैं और individual में birth और death. In a population, these rates refer to per capita birth and death, respectively. The rates hence expressed in change in numbers increase or decrease with respect to members of the population. Here is an example. If in a pond there are 20 lotus plants last year कितने थे? 20 plants थे, and through reproduction 8 new plants are added, और 8 और add हो गए. Taking the current population to 28, we calculate the birth rate as 8 by 20 is equals to 0.4 offsprings per lotus per year. ठीक है. If 4 individuals in the laboratory population of 40 fruit fly died, यानी कि 40 में से 4 चले गए during a specified time interval, say a week, एक week में, a death rate in the population during that period is 4 by 40, which is equals to 0.1 individual per fruit fly per week. ठीक है. तो इसे कैसे निकालते हैं? जितने ऐड हुए, जितना चेंज आया, ठीक है, 4 का चेंज आया, 8 का चेंज आया, उससे फिर टोटल से डिवाइड कर देंगे, जो पहले थे उससे डिवाइड कर देंगे. Another attribute characteristics of a population is sex ratio. An individual is either a male or a female, but a population has a sex ratio. Okay. Example: 60% of the population are female and 40% male. A population at any given time is composed of individuals of different ages. If the age distribution percent individuals of a given age or age group is plotted for the population, the resulting structure is an age pyramid. For human population, the age pyramid generally show age distribution of males and females in a combined diagram. The shape of the pyramid reflect the growth status of the population. पहला क्या है, whether it is growing, stable और declining. अब यहाँ पे फिगर 13.4 में दे रखा है एक्सपैंडिंग का है, एक स्टेबल का है, एक डिक्लाइनिंग का है. तो सबसे नीचे क्या है, प्री रिप्रोडक्टिव, रिप्रोडक्टिव, पोस्ट रिप्रोडक्टिव, इस पे भी क्वेश्चंस आते हैं. ठीक है. द साइज ऑफ द पॉपुलेशन टेल्स अस अ लॉट अबाउट इट्स स्टेटस इन द हैबिटेट. Whatever ecological process we wish to investigate in a population, be it the outcome of competition with another species, the impact of a predator, or the effect of a pesticide application, we always evaluate them in terms of any change in the population size. The size in nature could be as low as less than 10. That example यहाँ कहाँ का है, Siberian cranes at Bharatpur wetlands in any year, or go into millions, that is Chlamydomonas in a pond. Population size, more technically called population density, designated as N, need not necessarily be measured in numbers only. Although total number is generally the most appropriate measure of population density, it is in some cases either meaningless or difficult to determine. In an area, if there are 200 Parthenium plants but only a single huge banyan tree with a large canopy, stating that the population density of banyan is low relative to that of Parthenium, amount to underestimating the enormous role of the banyan in that community. In such cases, the percent cover or biomass is a more meaningful measure of the population size. Total number is again not an easily adoptable measure if the population is huge and counting is impossible or very time consuming. If you have a dense laboratory culture of bacteria in a petri dish, what is the best measure to report its density? Sometimes, for certain ecological investigations, there is no need to know the absolute population densities. Relative densities serve the purpose equally well. For instance, the number of fish caught per trap is good enough measure of its total population density in the lake. We are mostly obliged to estimate population sizes directly without actually counting them or seeing them. The tiger census in our national park and tiger reserves is often based on pug marks and fecal palate. ये जो जितनी भी लाइन है, ये पूरी जितना है इसमें, ये सब इम्पोर्टेंट है. इसमें जितने भी ये पॉपुलेशन एट्रीब्यूट से क्वेश्चन आते हैं, ये बहुत ज़्यादा क्वेश्चन आते हैं इस सब से, कि फीकल पैलेट और पग मार्क से पता चलता है, टाइगर सेंसस कैसे किए जाते हैं, फिश कॉट पर ट्रैप वाली ये सारी चीज़ें हैं, ये बहुत ज़्यादा इम्पोर्टेंट है. सो क्वेश्चन आते ही आते हैं. इस चैप्टर पे जो क्वेश्चन बनता है वो इन्हीं सब पे बनता है. ग्राफ वगैरह पे क्वेश्चन बनते हैं. ठीक है. और अब वीडियो ज़्यादा लंबी हो जाएगी, तो अब हम लोग आगे का जो पॉपुलेशन ग्रोथ से टॉपिक्स है, आगे हम लोग नेक्स्ट वीडियो में कवर करेंगे. तब तक के लिए प्लीज़ अच्छे से पढ़ाई करिए, और हमारे अगर आपको अच्छा लगा तो प्लीज़ हमारे चैनल को लाइक करिए, शेयर करिए, सब्सक्राइब करिए, और कोई भी चीज़ अगर आपको पूछनी हो तो प्लीज़ कमेंट करिए. थैंक यू सो मच. बाय.